Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders continue to lead the race for the Democratic nomination. So in this video, just like in previous videos, I want to showcase how different these two candidates are from each other. In this case, how different they are when it comes to women's rights. Now, before I get into it, I want to say here, in my research, I was actually kind of surprised. I was surprised how terrible Biden's record is on this, and I was surprised how fantastic Bernie's record is on this. So wait for that. First, let me explain what the Hyde Amendment is. So the Hyde Amendment has been the topic of conversation recently, and it essentially bans the use of federal funds for abortion unless it's to save the life of the woman. Now, Elizabeth Warren was in a town hall on MSNBC discussing why it is so important to repeal the Hyde Amendment.
I've lived in America where abortions were illegal.
Yeah.
And understand this, women still got abortions. Now, some got lucky on what happened, and some got really unlucky on what happened. But the bottom line is they were there. And under the Hyde Amendment, under every one of these efforts to try to chip away or to push back or to get rid of Roe versus Wade, understand this, women of means will still have access to abortions. Who won't will be poor women, will be working women, will be women who can't afford to take off 3 days from work, will be very young women, will be women who've been raped, will be women who have been molested by someone in their own family. We do not pass laws that take away that freedom from the women who are most vulnerable.
So I thought that was a fantastic answer on this issue, and you can clearly see where Elizabeth Warren sits on this. So before I get to Biden, let me get into Bernie's position on this. So first of all, it's very clear. As Bernie tweeted out this week, there is no middle ground on women's rights. Abortion is a constitutional right. Under my Medicare for All plan, we will repeal the Hyde Amendment. Now, if you listen to mainstream pundits, you might get the impression that Bernie's record on this is poor. So MSNBC analyst and senior director of progressive programming for Sirius XM, Zerlina Maxwell, tweeted this out. Bernie didn't support repealing Hyde when he started his campaign in 2016, but eventually did because black women vote. Now, yes, black women vote. But the part about Bernie there, completely untrue. So Bernie has actually always been against the Hyde Amendment. Not only did he commit to repealing it in 2016, but in 1993, when there was a vote on the Hyde Amendment that passed the House, Bernie Sanders was one of the members that voted against it. It's pretty clear. In fact, Bernie's support of reproductive rights goes back even further. So as Newsweek reported, a 1972 article surfaced showing Bernie Sanders backed abortion rights year before Roe v. Wade. Sanders told Vermont's Bennington Banner newspaper in September 1972, months before the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling on Roe v. Wade, that abortion procedures should only be a concern between a woman and her physician. The article sets aside several letters the then Liberty Union candidate for governor wrote to local newspapers calling for the abolition of all laws dealing with abortion, drugs, and sexual behavior. Quote, "It strikes me as incredible that politicians think that they have the right to tell a woman what she can or cannot do with her body," end quote, Sanders told the Bennington Banner on September 1st, 1972. Quote, "This is especially true in Vermont, where we have a legislature which is almost completely dominated by men," end quote. The opinions Sanders expressed to the Vermont newspaper were highly unpopular at the time, according to U.S. surveys, and Sanders' backing of abortion for nearly 50 years unveils a striking separation between himself and Biden, currently the 2020 Democratic frontrunner. So, understand here, Bernie on reproductive rights is actually a leader on this issue. He supported it before it was even law. There's going to be a clear distinction of Bernie's history on this to Biden's history. I mean, it is night and day. Now, actually, I'm going to have a little more on Bernie later on in the video, but let's get to Biden now. So earlier this week, there was so much back and forth. Biden told somebody from the ACLU that he, in fact, was for repealing the Hyde Amendment. Then when his campaign was questioned on it, they said, no, Biden still supports the Hyde Amendment. So he essentially lied to somebody from the ACLU. And then after the big uproar from Biden saying that he still supports the Hyde Amendment, he decided to change his mind. Or I should say, I guess he had a change of heart. It just so happened that his evolution on this issue coincided with all of the media scrutiny around him still supporting it. So he came out and said this.
We now see so many Republican governors denying health care to millions of the most poorest and most vulnerable Americans by refusing even Medicaid expansion. I can't justify leaving millions of women without access to the care they need and the ability to exercise their constitutionally protected right. If I believe health care is a right, as I do, I can no longer support an amendment that makes that right dependent on someone's zip code.
All right. Did that seem sincere to you? Joe Biden is often seen as a personable guy. That's why he has a lot of support, because he doesn't come off as, your typical politician to at least some people. But in this case, he is just straight up reading a carefully prepared statement off a piece of paper. I think his campaign came to him and said, you know what? You better support repealing the Hyde Amendment or else it's really going to hurt you. And he basically had no choice. So if he was actually sincere about this, he could have had a proper conversation about it. He could have said, I thought about this. I asked the people around me. I asked people in my life because I saw all this scrutiny and I didn't realize that I was misinformed on this issue. And I guess I wasn't listening before, but now I'm listening. And now I've changed because I do understand why it's so important to repeal the Hyde Amendment. And he could have had, a real moment, a human moment on this if he was actually sincere about it. But of course, he's not sincere about it. So he didn't have that human moment. Now, it's not even just the Hyde Amendment. Biden has always been terrible on women's rights. So as Ryan Grimm writes in The Intercept, as vice president, Joe Biden repeatedly sought to undermine the Affordable Care Act's contraception mandate, working in alliance with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to push for a broad exemption that would have left millions of women without coverage. Yeah, but you know what? His history is even worse than that. So this from Vox. On the Hyde Amendment, as senator in the 1970s and 80s, Biden supported the federal funding ban and opposed efforts to add the rape and incest exemptions, according to NBC. Biden's positions on abortion have changed over time. A Catholic who has said he is, quote, personally opposed to abortion, he voted in the early 1980s in favor of a constitutional amendment to allow states to overturn Roe v. Wade. Joe Biden likely has the worst record of any Democrat running for president. Again, as I've discussed in previous videos, if Joe Biden were to actually win the Democratic nomination, he will suppress the vote even more than Hillary Clinton did. He will not be able to turn out the base. So understand here, if you want to pick somebody for the nomination that can actually beat Donald Trump, Joe Biden is not your choice. There are other people in the race that can definitely beat Donald Trump. Joe Biden, I think, would have the biggest challenge beating Donald Trump. Because remember here, conservatives will come out and vote anyways, and they will vote for Donald Trump. This idea that Democrats can attract conservative voters never comes to fruition. It never actually happens. They keep trying to do it, and they keep losing. How about actually appealing to everybody else in the country? How about trying to appeal to non-voters that have been so disillusioned by this two-party system? Because as we see with Joe Biden, he is very similar to Republicans on the issue of women's rights. So you have to actually vote for somebody that is different than the conservative. Now, let me get to some other Democrats on this because, look, as we saw earlier, Warren is good on this, but we have to be honest about her record and others and other Democrats running their record as well. So as Politico tweeted out, an example, Elizabeth Warren says she doesn't like the Hyde Amendment, but she's voted for it. It was part of a bill that funded a big chunk of the government last year. Michael Bennet, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, and Beto O'Rourke, Eric Swalwell, and others voted in favor of that bill too. Bernie Sanders voted no. Bernie is the only true leader in the top tier of candidates in this race. I mean, issue after issue after issue. It's not even just his recent positions on these issues. It's going back 40 years on these issues. If you want someone to actually fight for you and fight for these policies, fight on these issues, fight for actual people, there is one clear candidate sitting in the top tier right now that can do that and will do that. And by the way, they aren't taking any private money. They aren't taking any corporate money. They aren't influenced by anybody else except for the people that he's running for. He has a grassroots movement, a volunteer base, and individual donors that are fueling his campaign. There is one leader in this race. Now, I'm not even done. There's more. So Bernie is actually also willing to challenge sitting Democrats on this. So as Common Dreams reports, citing threats to abortion rights, Sanders endorses Marie Newman's Democratic primary challenge against anti-choice incumbent Dan Lipinski. Quote, "She will be a powerful voice for upholding Roe v. Wade at a disturbing moment in our history when a woman's right to control her own body and future is at stake." So, Lipinski, a sitting Democrat, Bernie Sanders is endorsing his primary challenger because of the issue of women's rights. And look, to be completely transparent here, Kirsten Gillibrand and Jay Inslee also support Marie Newman in this race. But Kirsten Gillibrand and Jay Inslee are, I don't even think, hitting 1% at this point. I think Gillibrand has 1% maybe. Jay Inslee, I don't even think has 1%. So if we're looking at, again, the top tier of candidates that can actually win this primary and beat Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders is the clear choice and also the clear leader on women's rights.